Hello again, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Angles and Attitudes. My partner, John, how you doing on this?
Hey,
Thursday
good
afternoon?
evening, Mark.
Hey, today we got a return guest, and we're really excited about it. He's written over 21 baseball books. He's a historian for the Chicago Baseball Museum. You know him, you love him. George Castle. George, thanks for jumping on, and welcome back to the podcast.
How's it going, George?
Great. John, Mark, glad to be back. And, it's great to talk baseball and it's great to talk history. So I'm in my element, and thank you for putting me squarely in there.
There you go. Well, thanks for joining. So we're going to start with your latest and greatest project. I know John's got a copy of it, and he started to read that as well. So Chili Dog MVP, Dick Allen, the 1972 White Sox in a transforming Chicago. A lot of stuff in there. So we're going to turn it over to you and let you break that down, because as I said, from Dick Allen being a polarizing figure, somebody who wasn't understood, to a team that nobody seemed to want, to a political situation in the city of Chicago, all that stuff mixed together. Take it away from there, George.
It's almost the old Mike Murphy. We had 10 pounds to stuff into a 5-pound bag. And it was my decision. I'm sort of the general manager of this book, not the lead author, although I contributed about 20,000 words of writing in there. So what we wanted to do is not only recreate the amazing season that Dick Allen had. He was a one-man gang for the White Sox, won the MVP, and completed their comeback from total irrelevance in the market. Only 2 years before, when they lost a team record 106 games, the White Sox were in first place on September 1st. And if Dick Allen in subsequent years had not gotten hurt, the White Sox might have achieved parity, if not exceeded the Cubs standing in this town. And we backtracked in the book for decades how that happened. But it's not only a book about Dick Allen's memorable season and the White Sox, the little team that could, challenging the soon-to-be dynastic Oakland A's for the American League West title, but also a book about Chicago at a time when the Black community would not just obey what the Democratic machine wanted it to do, and that is contribute votes and get very little back. They rebelled against the machine. And also, it was a time of, as I said, great change in Chicago. 50 years later, it hasn't eradicated poverty and crime and things like that. But it's nice to see people stand up for themselves. And against this background, a lot of people from all walks of life and all races came together in Old Comiskey Park to cheer for Dick Allen and the White Sox. It was also a time when Harry Carey became popular in Chicago. Most people think of Harry Carey as the Harry Carey Presents Cubs Baseball, but it was even on a little network of suburban radio stations that Harry Carey first became the toast of Rush Street here and really became popular, and some of his best broadcast work was done in his decade-long stint with the White Sox from 1971 through 1981. Also, Nancy Faust became the most prominent organist in baseball. She was the first organist to start doing walk-up tunes for players, starting with Dick Allen's Jesus Christ Superstar. And Nancy was so popular, she worked for every Chicago team except the Cubs and the Bears, and the Cubs wanted to hire her.
Wow. I have to tell you, George, love the way this book starts out. Started reading it. I'm in the maybe 4 or 5 chapters. I was telling Mark about it. I mean, you guys really depicted everything that was going on. No one would have ever thought of this. I mean, you really had to really follow baseball in Chicago. I know you're going to get into the thing about how the White Sox were on WFLD and how that almost was going to be the bomb for them, because at the time, and then getting Harry into that booth, of course, after the veteran Jack Drees, who was announcing those games on TV with, he had a fling with the On Deck show with the lefty that has erased my mind, Billy Pierce. And then all of a sudden, when Harry went to the television side, it was the start of a change. And you really depict so many things in the book that were like, wow, I remember that. How did you get to that where you had to dig to find, and there's some unbelievable pictures also in the book, but take us through those early years, especially like you said, from the trade for Tommy John, whether we trade Tommy John to the Dodgers, we get Hunts and we get Allen. Take us from there.
Well, again, the Sox had revived kind of on their own, having hired Chuck Tanner and Roland Hemet as basically the general manager without title near the end of the 1970 season. If we back everything up, the White Sox had that 17-year run as the Go-Go White Sox. They were almost a consistent contender. The fact that they did not have a good lineup, they did not have good run producers, cost them several pennants in the 1960s because they had great pitching, but they couldn't back it up. And from 1963 to 1965, the White Sox won 94 games each year and finished second each time. They were 30 years too soon for the wild card. And but that era kind of ground to an end in 1960 after the 1967 season, when the Sox failed to win a doubleheader in Kansas City and lost out in a very close 4-team American League race. But they were a boring team with really no offense. They had actually watered down the infield and dampened baseballs to help their pitchers, but they hurt their hitters. But that was not what the public wanted to see. Football, the NFL was coming on very strong, and baseball overall was considered in some respects boring. So you had that with the Cubs coming on under Leo DeRocher, with their good young team and the veterans, Banks, Williams, and Sano. Fergie Jenkins starting his run of 6 straight 20-win seasons. They captured the town, and owner Arthur Allen saw his White Sox lose both on the field and at the gate, to the point where when the Cubs are flying high in 1969, he just threw up his hands and said, I can't do this anymore. And so Bud Selig, who had been trying to replace the Braves in Milwaukee since the Braves left after the 1965 season, they reached a verbal agreement to transfer the Sox to Bud Selig's ownership. But the hero, the unsung hero of the book, was Arthur Allen's brother, John Allen, who stayed in the background. But since the Allen family had bought the team from Bill Veeck in 1961, John Allen actually was half owner of the team. He had veto power over a sale. So Arthur Allen says, fine, you take over the White Sox. John Allen was committed to keeping them in Chicago and Comiskey Park. It was that close to a sale. However, I must say the sale was not a fait accompli, because the American League had to approve it, and there reportedly was a majority of American League owners that did not want to abandon the Chicago market. But again, Arthur Allen had a sale agreement with Bud Selig, and we covered that, and we talked to Bud about those days, about that whole process. And because the White Sox deal fell through, this is the backstory, but it affects baseball now. Bud then turned his attention to getting the bankrupt Seattle Pilots, which are an expansion team in 1969, and he moved them to Milwaukee just before the 1970 season. They became the Brewers. Yep. And now you got the Brewers and Cubs as a huge rivalry. The Brewers as a contender, and a new 20-year-old stadium in Milwaukee, thanks to the efforts of Bud Selig in the years before he became commissioner. So there's a tremendous backstory there. John Allen went through a really rough season, but he changed the management. Roland Hemet brought in some new players. The Sox improved from 56 wins to 79 wins in the 1971 season. And then at the 1971 winter meetings, he had heard that Dick Allen would be available in a deal. And so he contacted Chuck Tanner, who was just from up the road from where Dick Allen grew up in Wampum, Pennsylvania, Tanner from Newcastle, Pennsylvania, and said, can you help persuade Dick Allen to come here? And so the deal was made. Allen kind of held out, as he always did with the Phillies and other teams, for a salary, but they eventually made a multi-year deal for an enormous amount of money. It was like $125,000, or I think it might have even been more than that, but it was a lot of money for anybody in 1972. And so Dick Allen was in the fold, and the baseball's first strike delayed the start of the 1972 season by more than a week. And Dick Allen was a hit from the get-go. And we take everybody through that season and the Dick Allen backstory, where he was the first Black star that the Phillies had developed. The Phillies were the last team in the National League to integrate. They had a racist past as far as their attitudes towards Black players. Jackie Robinson in 1947 had his most trouble in Philadelphia. And, Dick's, a lot of Dick's attitudes were shaped by whatever happened in Philly. And we go back to that time where he had a fight with the first Frank Thomas, not the Frank Thomas that we know from the White Sox, but Frank Thomas was a slugger back in the 50s and early 60s, twice a Cub. And they exchanged words in the batting cage one night before a game in Philadelphia. And I believe Frank kind of tapped Dick with the bat. And Frank, of course, was a player, on his last legs. So he was the one released. But here's the problem. Dick did not defend himself and tell his side of the story in the fight. I looked at the Philadelphia Inquirer's coverage, and Dick was offered a chance to go in depth, and his only response was, "What fight?" And it ended up with Frank Thomas doing a whole 25, inch, 1,000-word feature explaining his side. So public opinion turned against Dick in Philadelphia, and he became more sullen and rebellious as the years went on. But that didn't affect his play on the field when he was playing, because he was considered a really good teammate. He was an extremely productive player, and in fact, probably one of the top 2 or 3 most productive run producers and sluggers in baseball during that period. And so he eventually, he had another tie with baseball history, in that when the Phillies finally acceded to his demands and traded him after the 69 season, he was traded for Curt Flood to the Cardinals. And Curt Flood turned down that deal, which cost him basically his career, but basically led to free agency 5 years later in baseball.
Yeah, there's so many things in it to unpack there. You look at the and I have to be careful because John's a huge White Sox fan, and I was born and raised Northside Cub fan, so there's that bias. But it seems that there's always that playing second fiddle on a South Side as far as the White Sox were concerned, never getting all of the publicity that the Cubs did, not even thinking about the fact that the Cubs started their run, and and Harry being on being at the bars in Wrigleyville and all. But Harry started and made his name in Chicago, like you said. Then the broadcast with Jimmy Pearsall. Those are
that was on TV. That was much later. This is
this people didn't even think about some of those things there. Yeah. And then as far as Dick Allen is concerned, you talking about, everybody always talks about, even I talked to my dad today, and he's like, oh yeah, the guy didn't seem to ever want to get along. And there's a lot more that you get into as far as the book is concerned, that he didn't feel really necessary to have to justify or share, because he just went about his business. It's funny, and I know John probably don't have it. It'd be George, you might have it, right? The Sports Illustrated cover with him in the dugout juggling the baseballs with a cigarette in his mouth. And it's just those types of things, just that cool cat, that didn't have to apologize to anybody or kiss anybody's ring. He was who he was. And statistically, obviously, as you guys talk about, his performance on the field spoke, if you let it, spoke a lot higher and louder than people ever really realized, right?
Well, Dick was not a politician. And you mentioned the Sports Illustrated cover. John, hold up the cover of the book again.
Yeah,
because we have a tremendous, you see those pinwheels, the old pinwheels from the scoreboard. So we have a true Major League star artist, Todd Radom, who did that cover. He also designed the uniforms for the Sox for the Field of Dreams game last year in Iowa. So instead of baseballs, he's juggling in his vintage 72 uniform, he's juggling the pinwheels. The pinwheels, which would have been set off by home runs, the pinwheels on top of the scoreboard at Comiskey Park. And so that's the take on the old SI cover, juggling the baseballs there. And of course, what I also asked Todd to do was to surround Dick, and it's a tremendous idea. I can't claim credit for the pinwheels, but I wanted to have some of the characters that we're dealing with, the ancillary characters of 1972 in that era, Harry Carey, Nancy Faust, Wilbur Wood, who was a Cy Young Award winner with 24 wins for the Sox, knuckleball pitcher, but also Mayor Daley, who overshadowed practically everything in Chicago life. And Todd's original drawing of Mayor Daley was kind of straightforward. I wanted to show the angry Mayor Daley that we remember from the 1968 Democratic Convention. And so, John, if you could show Mayor Daley, that's basically him yelling at Abe Ribicoff there. We can't repeat. Yeah, there we go. There we go.
And then we got Harry, and we got the Wilbur, and we got Nancy Faust.
Yeah. The funny thing was, Todd originally had Harry in a tie and a sport coat, and Harry was very, very casual when he broadcast the White Sox in those years on radio. Plus, he did not have his entire shock of white hair that we remember from his final Cubs years. It was salt and pepper hair, and so. I had Todd alter Harry to the way he was in 71. We also have several photos of Harry in all his glory, stripped to the waist, doing the games from the bleachers. And in fact, some of the photos we have, one is Harry being very effusive in the bleachers, and the other one was a game that I attended on August 23rd, 1972. It was a Wednesday afternoon, matinee special against the Yankees, where Dick hit one into the faraway center field bleachers, and it came close to where Harry was set up. Harry had his fishnet, so we got the photo taken from, behind third base of Harry waving his fishnet while kids are running to catch the ball there. And we actually got a hold of the broadcast where Harry saying the ball's coming to him 450 feet away. And the photos really, the artwork, picture, the old saying, a picture says 1,000 words. The photos really carry the mail in this book, in addition to the text and the narrative, because not only do we have some great photos like I just described, but we had some other photos of things that were happening in Chicago, like what I call a proto-January 6th, when a bunch of white construction workers, thousands of them, blocked a hearing on racial discrimination in the building trades. This was back in 1969, but it's part of this era. Mm-hmm. And they ended up fighting with Chicago police. They're brothers from the parishes in Chicago. From where you are on the far northwest side, some of these cops and these construction workers are from your area there, John. So sure. I found a photo with the help of Tim Cronin, a longtime Southtown sports writer and author and golf enthusiast. He noticed that somebody was selling a photo of these construction workers doing the Spider-Man act on the Picasso, climbing the Picasso, and climbing up to the top of the head with their protest signs. So he says somebody's selling this on eBay. So yeah, there it is. Yeah. You see them doing Spider-Man. That's unbelievable. Yeah. And this is only 2 years after the Picasso was dedicated. And so I found out that AP, Associated Press, could sell this photo, and we acquired it. I wouldn't have known about it unless Tim Cronin had noticed that it had been selling on eBay. So the photo still existed. So we went to great lengths on this. We described the turmoil of the times. That particular proto-January 6th was lost in history because of all the anti-war demonstrations of the time. And in fact, it took place at the time the Chicago 7 trial was starting. So that didn't get the publicity that all these protests in the Democratic Convention got. So we brought it back to show that these attitudes that ended up with the storming of the Capitol have been bubbling around for half a century or more.
You want to tell me and Mark a little bit about that June 4th, 1972 game, how we get the title of this book, Chili Dog MVP?
Sure. That was a Bat Day doubleheader on Sunday against the Yankees, and there were almost 50,000 people there. Old Comiskey Park. You both were there. You know, it was a big enclosed place. In fact, when I went there in the late 70s, you could almost get high from secondhand smoke there, because whatever was being smoked, the four walls held that in. So I wasn't a partaker, but you know how enclosed that old ballpark was. Yep. Well, anyway, you had this monster crowd showing up. The Sox were contending. The Sox revived. Allen had not missed an entire game up to the first 2 months of the season. Well, the Sox won the first game of the doubleheader, and Chuck Tanner decided to rest him in the second game. So John Allen, the owner, comes down to Tanner's office. He's livid. He says, "What do you mean Allen isn't playing?" Well, Chuck wants to give him a rest. I mean, you can't run the guy into the ground. Chuck, for whatever you could say, Chuck was a cheerleader, smiley guy, whatever. He was not Leo Durocher. He wasn't going to run his team into the ground, especially a star like Durocher had done to the 1969 Cubs. But so Allen takes the game off. He soaks in the tub with a bottle of booze. And then when he gets out of the tub, the whirlpool, he eats a chili dog by his locker. Well, Chuck, the Sox were trailing 4-2 at the time. And so Chuck had an idea. He's going to save Dick for a game situation in the ninth. He could have pinched him in the eighth, but Chuck was thinking a couple of innings ahead. And so as Dick is happily slurping the chili dog with chili made by the clubhouse guy who was from Bridgeport, it's homemade chili. It wasn't chili you got at the Jewel. He is told, the manager wants you in the dugout. So apparently he dribbled some of the chili on his uniform, had to quickly dress and ran to the dugout. He then comes up against Sparky Lyle, hits a pinch hit 3-run homer. The Sox win. It was, as I talked to fans who were at that game, the electricity was coursing through the ballpark. Everybody kind of knew that Dick was he didn't have to call a shot because he was going to actually go ahead and do it. And as Sparky Lyle went to the mound, Mike Andrews, who was a former Lyle teammate with the Red Sox, told Sparky as he's walking out to the mound, Mike was on first, base runner. He says, "You're in deep doo-doo." He didn't use the word doo-doo, but it was a synonym for that.
That harkens back like to right with the scene out of The Natural when Robert Redford hits the home run and everything that you could think of. That
all the light stands are blown.
Yeah, I mean, but that's one of those truth is stranger than fiction ones to where you would never, think about that. You're talking about the artwork on the cover of the book, which is wonderful. I forget because again, I'm not a White Sox fan. What year did they go from the blue to the red and put the red pinstripe and change that uniform? Was that late 60s, early 70s?
No. That was symbolic. That was symbolic with their initial revival in 71. Okay. So John Allen was owner for 1 year. They had the old Detroit Tiger style uniforms, home uniforms for 2 years, 69 and 70. And then, Arthur Allen was copying, what the Tigers had done with their 68 World Championship. But John Allen felt that red was a powerful color, and red was a color of the Big Red Machine, which had just started at the time. So those red pinstripes were a big hit. They were flannels in 1960 or 1971, and then double knits and very tailored uniform for Dick Allen with his muscles in 1972. And they used that uniform for 5 seasons until Bill Veeck came over and he put in those crazy softball uniforms.
Yeah, he would come out with that red shirt, Mark. It could have been 95 degrees Allen, or it could be below zero. He'd always wear that red sweatshirt underneath. Question for you, George. Only probably you can answer this. Over the years, I think it's hurt Allen Maybe those White Sox years did hurt him in the sense of the Hall of Fame. There were rules for the Chicago White Sox and there were rules for Dick Allen. Is that true?
Yeah, there were rules for Dick Allen. I guess Chuck Tanner realized, Dick Allen was so valuable to the team, and he did not. Dick Allen did not often take batting practice. His reasoning was, why should I try to hit a half-speed fastball when I'm supposed to hit a 90 mile an hour, whatever the top speed was? They didn't have the 100 mile an hour throwers like today, but game speed fastballs. He said that doesn't really help me. Now, I have a personal idea, and I've criticized Cub players for this. I didn't like the fact that Moises Alou would sashay into the clubhouse the last guy in, because Moises was a known night crawler. And I think that a player needs to be there, whether he wants to take batting practice or not. Batting practice is overrated. Joe Madden cut down second half batting practice, and it helped the Cubs because of all the Cubs collapses in history. And Joe realized that's too much work in the heat of August and whatever. So I just think that Dick Allen needed to be there earlier to be with his teammates. He was a team leader, and you just need to be in the team framework, the team mindset, be with your teammates. And but again, it worked for Dick. He was consistent from start to finish in his Sox career. And Chuck Tanner was criticized and Dick Allen was criticized for this different set of rules. And I think Dick might have been able to help himself. He was not a political guy. We talked about this before. He's not a political guy. He didn't play the politics game. He didn't play the politics game with the writers. He showed up late. There's one instance where the Sox take the field for the national anthem. There's no first baseman. Well, where's Dick? Got to have a first baseman. Well, as the notes started to sing for the anthem, we hear the clop of cleats in the tunnel, and that's Dick running out. And by the time the anthem finished, Dick was taking throws at first base. But that's the one thing, I'm going to use the First Amendment to say, I think Dick hurt himself by not being political and not being his own advocate. Baseball, if anything, is a very political game. I've known that, from the press box, and that's very political. Covered baseball for over 35 years. So you march to your own drummer, and there's repercussions not only in your image, but unfortunately, maybe 30 years down the road when you're up for the Hall of Fame vote.
Well, I think, and I appreciate you try to take care of people who are obviously very key elements on a team, whether it's a baseball team, hockey team, or whatever. But to your point, George, which is a good one, eventually the team has to take precedent over the individual because you're all part of that, even though baseball probably is, obviously from all years you covered, the most individualized team sport that there is out there. But especially back in that day, you see a little bit now recently in the start of the season, guys getting plunked, a lot of guys pitching inside. And I'm sure the game was played way differently in the 70s in terms of hard slides and balls inside and guys getting hit. And that was even more important as a teammate, right? To know that everybody on your team had the same rules and it was going to play the game the same way. And there was that expectation that the guy next to you was going to be there on time when you were there and you were going to get the same thing out of them. And maybe, like you said, that hurt him long-term in terms of Hall of Fame and those types of things.
No, he was a great teammate. Even on the Phillies, they thought he was a great teammate. And by the way, I should mention that, Dick wanted to be traded probably midway through his Phillies career. And one of the trades that the Phillies tried to make was to the Cubs for either Billy Williams or Ron Santo. Cubs turned down both proposals. That's kind of lost in history. But no, Dick, nobody ever criticized Dick for jaking it on the field, for not hustling. He was a great teammate. He was a 4 or 5 tool player. He didn't have a good throwing arm. Gene Mock miscast him at third as a rookie. He was basically an outfielder, but he made 40 errors at third as a rookie. Didn't cost him the Rookie of the Year award. But he was basically a five-tool player. He was the Sox best base runner, and he was a good first baseman with some range, and he could dig out throws, things like that. So on the field, it was great. But there's certain things you've got to do off the field to really boost your team. And I think one other thing that Dick could have done is to be the spokesman for the team. And again, he didn't like doing that. Not that he was hostile to the press, but he just didn't care about playing the political game.
George, the book, how's it doing in the sense of, I mean, you have to be really that avid Chicago fan to remember this book, and especially being a South Sider following the White Sox. How's the book done? The book, I mean, I never thought, it is a huge book. There's a lot to read. There's a lot to catch up on. I mean, it's fantastic. Every time you think, every time I've indulged into it, I learned something or I remember something. But overall, how's the book doing?
It was rated Amazon's a leader in the sports history category. I encounter every day somebody who has the book. It's gotten off to a very fast start. We've gotten tremendous publicity. You're part of the great publicity. One of our co-authors, John Owens, has been on WGN radio, not one, not two, but 3 times.
Wow.
That's pretty unprecedented. WBBM radio did a spot tied to opening day. Keep rerunning it. We got some great write-up, a great review by Rick Hogan in the Tribune. So all of my own books that I authored through the years that you've read, both of you guys have read, this publicity is twice what I got for any of my books. It's absolutely sensational.
Well, we appreciate the publicity you generate for us. Speaking of the authors, talk to us a little bit. I found intriguing Dr. Fletcher and his relationship with Dick Allen and how that evolved. Can you share a little bit about that with us?
Sure. It's a very unique relationship that went to the end of Dick's life. Dr. David Fletcher, who I got to know sitting in the press box at Guaranteed Rate Field, is then U.S. Cellular Field, in 2012, tried to build a Chicago baseball museum. He was unable to build a brick and mortar version. It's just too costly. There's too much politics involved. This is Chicago. What do you expect? So I got to know him, and around that time, he had remembered, he had this idea for the book because he had gone to 20 games for that 1972 season as a just graduated graduated student from Glenbard West High School. He was starting at the University of Illinois in the fall of '72. So he came up with the idea not only of a Chicago Baseball Museum, but a 40th anniversary celebration of the 1972 White Sox. And he persuaded the White Sox to host this. So they had a bit of a on the field presentation with some of those mascot type of guys that mimicked the look of Dick Allen and Goose Gossage and all that. And then they had a big dinner at the Stadium Club. And I think in that event in 2012, he got to know Dick Allen. He became close with them in years after that, became close with Dick's family, his son, several of his brothers, and began to champion Dick's bid for the Hall of Fame. It fell 1 vote short in 2014. And then this last year, posthumously, it also fell 1 vote short. And he was so close to Dick Allen that when the Phillies tried to make amends for all the mistreatment of Dick way in the past, the Phillies in the September of 2020, in the middle of the pandemic, decided to retire Dick's number 15. And Doc Fletcher, whose main practice is down in Champaign, Illinois, as an occupational medicine specialist, was the only Chicagoan invited. And Phillies managing partner John Middleton, who was a Phillies fan back in Dick's playing days, made amends for Dick, and Dick showed up, even though Dick was starting to get very, very sick from lung cancer. Dick was a heavy smoker, and as John and you remember, that famous SI cover had a cigarette dangling from Dick's mouth. I think Dick smoked in all circumstances except when he was actually on the field. And Now, he wasn't the only player to smoke in the dugout in between his at bats in those days. Billy Williams told me how he used to try to sneak a smoke in the Cubs dugout, hiding behind another teammate, or they'd go in the tunnel. But so Doc Fletcher ended up as one of Dick's pallbearers when he died at the end of 2020. So he became, his access to the Allen family was very, very crucial. And in fact, if we do come out with a second edition of this book, he's made some connections with John Allen's family, including his son. So we may add that material to the book. John Allen did not have a long life. You know, Dick was fortunate to live till 78, 79 years old. But John Allen died in his mid-50s in 1979, you know, only 4 years after he had sold the majority interest back to Bill Veeck.
It's interesting, the story there with the doctor and how passionate fans just know no end to their passion and their loyalty to their team, whether it's a Cub fan or a White Sox fan, and how that develops. But also, I think that what the book shows is, you know, people talk about who aren't necessarily as connected to sports, but how sports intertwines with their everyday life, and it's connected. Sometimes it's a distraction, and other times, you know, and I think that's, as we've seen now, obviously with some of the movements and everything, and not to compare, but you know, the national anthems and all those other things, how sports now, because of so much being more visible, have become so much more necessarily involved, and generations, older generations are still trying to figure out, right, John? We say we just want to watch a ball game to watch a ball game. We don't want to watch a ball game. You know, we'll watch the news at 6 o'clock if that's what we want to talk about. But as you start to sprinkle it into, you know, our games and using it as a platform, it becomes a little difficult for our generation a little bit.
You know, it's funny because when we talk about 1972, it was an era where you and I all of us experienced as kids then, we could decide on that day of the game, to go to a Cubs or White Sox game. No game was sold out in advance. The tickets were cheap enough so that a teenager could afford it. Scrape together $1.50 to be able to go out there. And it was a little more difficult to get out to White Sox Park at the time. That's what it was called, because the majority of games are at night. So most of the people who went to games there drove then as they do now. And so until you got your own car, it was a little difficult to get out there. I know I took the train, the L train, all the way from the north side. And at that time, it's on the Green Line now, and that dropped you off at 35th and State. And that was nearly a 4-block walk past the old Stateway, the end of the old Stateway Gardens housing projects. And that was a little harrowing for kids from way up on the north side. And I know when I finally got my junker car at the end of 1974, I would then drive it down to old Comiskey Park. I would park on Shields at 32nd or 31st Street. They didn't have residents only parking there. And so I would just walk 3 blocks to save the $1 parking charge. But I would always, from then on, once I got the car, I'd always drive there where you would take the L to Wrigley Field, because there simply was no adequate parking around there. Although with the junker car, and before Wrigley Field became a gentrified neighborhood, I found some places in the neighborhood east of the ballpark to park it, and nobody was going to bother a 9-year-old car at the bashed in left rear door.
George, and those were 8 o'clock starts in those days.
Yes, they were.
George.
Yeah, and one of the reasons for 8 o'clock starts is that and most teams had 8 o'clock starts that played night games. In fact, they all played night games except the Cubs. Was that they didn't feel the average working man taking his family, if he did, would have dinner at the ballpark. So they would allow him time to go home, grab some dinner, and then come out to the ballpark, because you didn't have all the menu items that you have now that are $12 beers and $14 sandwiches and all that. So hot dogs just weren't going to cut it for dinner. So they felt that 8 o'clock was late enough so for the people could go home and then get out to the ballpark. But also the Sox had arrangements with restaurants around the South Side, like Mama Bat's on 22nd Street. you could go there for dinner and then they run a bus to the ballpark. You didn't have that at Wrigley Field with all the day games. Now, again, you mentioned, it's crucial that you mention the 8 o'clock starts, because this is the reason why the Cubs are number one in this town and the Sox are a perpetual number two. And it still affects it today, because in those days, we were the only 2-team market in baseball, where one team played all its games during the day and the other team played at night. That played into media coverage perfectly, because the Cubs could have your 1:30 game, because at that time, WGN did not allow the other stations in town to use its game videotape on the news. So the stations 2, 5, and 7 had to send out their own film crews to the ballpark. So what would happen is about 3:30 or 4 o'clock, they'd have motorcycle couriers pull up to Wrigley Field, take the undeveloped film from these camera crews, rush it downtown, develop it, and voila, WGN did not have, well, they had a short early evening newscast, but the other stations could put film on the news at 5 or 6 o'clock. You couldn't do that with a White Sox game at 8 o'clock. Certainly for a 10 o'clock game, the game might still be going on. And games are shorter, but some games would last past 10 o'clock. So the Cubs got so much more exposure in the market because of the thing in the schedule and newspaper deadlines for morning papers. When you'd read about the Sox game in the morning in your Tribune or Sun-Times, the complete Cubs story with quotes and everything and columns were featured, where the writers had to rush to get the game story in the home delivered edition of the morning papers from a Sox game. And I'll say this, the late David Condon told me, the Tribune's lead columnist in the wake of the news, said that when Sam Jones threw a no-hitter for the Cubs in 1955, because it was a day game, Condon had time to track down Jim Hippo Vaughn, who had thrown the last Cubs no-hitter in Wrigley Field in 1917. Hippo Vaughn worked at a manufacturing company on Grand Avenue. He had enough time to track him down, write a story, and it was in the home edition of the paper. And so the Sox suffer from that, and it was made far worse when Arthur Allen jumped his WGN contract. He still had a year to go. The negotiating time was still 6 months in the future for a new contract. He jumped the deal to get $1 million a year contract from the brand new Fox 32 WFLD. And I wrote the broadcast and media chapters, how the Sox and Cubs got to where they are. I tracked things way, way, way back to 1949 when WGN was in its second year on the air. They did both teams. They did the games for both teams, I should say. When you'd have a Cubs day game, the WGN would have a newsreel crew go out to Wrigley Field, film the game. And so Brickhouse would come into the studio at 8 o'clock that night to do a Cubs wrap up with newsreel footage. So in 1949, that must have seemed like Flash Gordon to watch filmed highlights of the game the very day that it appeared. I mean, people were used to seeing newsreel footages of things that happened 2 weeks before in the theaters at that point. You had a Sox game, same time, 1:30, same distance from Tribune Tower where the Tribunes, where WGN studios were. They did not do a newsreel show for White Sox highlights. Then in 1950, Frank Lane, I believe it was Frank Lane, because he had just taken over as general manager of the Sox, barred White Sox home night games from being shown on TV. So, John, Mark, George, we're watching an entire Cubs homestand as kids. The entire homestand, unbroken, is on TV. You might have a Sox game from Thursday afternoon, a Sox game from Saturday, a Sox game from Sunday on. It wasn't the same. The Cubs just blew the Sox out, even when they were a poor team on the field compared to the Sox contender, for those kids running home to watch those games. And
I remember coming home, getting to see the Ernie Banks 500 home run against Pat Jarvis. And to this day, you know, in my mind, the tape is way clearer than when you watch the old grainy video with the bad graphics and everything else. but that was a huge, if you couldn't consume the product, it really didn't matter. I mean, and unfortunately you saw that a lot. John and I, obviously big hockey guys, right? The Wirtz family kept the product, those home games, from us being able to watch those games. And, you know, for many years, our home games were, even for the Blackhawks, right, John? They didn't pick the games up until the second period on WMAQ at 8:15 on a Sunday
WGN.
night.
Can I interject?
Yes.
It was even worse than that. WGN radio had the radio rights in the late 60s, and Rich King was a young producer then, just starting his career. And so they would not pick up the game till 8:15, and they would start the broadcast with the first period highlight show. So I asked Rich, what would you do if there was no score in that first period? He says, we'd have to put on a great save or something like that. So I'm interjecting this because this did affect the Cubs and Sox with their TV coverage, because the Cubs had blanket TV coverage, and that generated ticket buyers. When John, you and me became adults, or even when we became old enough to buy tickets, we went out to the ballpark as teenagers. You know, when we had enough money in our pockets, $3-4 was enough to get in. But I asked Rocky Wirtz about 9-10 years ago. I said, okay, your father, Bill Wirtz, was partners with Reinsdorf at the old Chicago Stadium. In the mid-'80s, Reinsdorf put all the home games on cable TV, on Sports Vision, Sports Channel, whatever. The Hawks would black it out. And even with the games on cable, you know, cable was $10-15 a month then, they started selling out. Why didn't, and they were making much more money in advertising between the games on TV and Michael Jordan, the Bulls were a moneymaker. Why didn't Bill Wirtz understand? He was partnering with Reinsdorf at the time, and they built the United Center together. Why didn't he understand the same thing could happen to the Hawks? And Rocky Wirtz's answer was, quote, my father was a stubborn German.
Well, and that's it. There's no explanation. You know, he tried to sell, well, I'm trying to protect the rights of my season ticket holder. And it was like, again, now you put those games on Sunday nights where kids are getting ready to go to bed, or you're not going to go out. And now you sit around as a family and you watch those games. And obviously that team from 2009 and up until just the past few years benefited from being good and having the exposure. So there was two things going on. Those things met, but you had, from a baseball standpoint, you could still sell an experience, a 75-degree sunny day. You want to go out to the ballpark. And like you said, you pay $4. You probably spent more on the bus driving from Harlem and Addison all the way to the ballpark to pay the bus fare than you did to actually buy a ticket to get into the ballpark. And
well, here's another interesting thing about, the Sox screwed themselves up by going to UHF at a time. I mean, Arthur Allen needed the money, and that $1 million a year kept the Sox afloat until his brother, assumed the ownership of the team. But here's the thing. UHF had only 40% penetration of the market. The famous broadcast executive, Red Quinlan, who founded Channel 32, told Arthur Allen, he fell for this line of cock and bull, sounded like he was selling them an advertising thing, that they would have 75% penetration by the time the games began on 32 in 1968. There's no way you go from 40% in November of 66 to 75% a year and a half later. The color TV sets were booming then, but not booming that fast. I didn't have color till 1978. I'm sure a lot of us didn't have color till the 70s. So here's the thing. Even if you did get UHF, and I got a converter, like a $20-25 converter, a little box with a loop antenna that I put on top of my 1963 black and white Zenith that had only VHF. It had an old radio dial tuner. It didn't lock into each channel, lock into 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, 9. It was a dial, so you couldn't lock into 32. So you had that grainy, picture. You had that grainy picture. It was like tuning in to a Hawks game on radio. And so that hurt the White Sox. And there are a lot of Sox fans and media experts who said, because they went on 32, they lost practically a generation of fans.
I have to tell you something here, Mark, real quick, because the time's against us a little bit, but I want to kind of close it off here. A big shout out to Eckhart's Press who published the book for you guys, George, for John, Dave, and of course yourself. Matter of fact, they hand delivered the book here to me Friday when I told them I was going to have George Cancel on. Eckhart's Press came directly to my travel agency and got this done. Here's what
Well, John, by the way, you know why he did that? Because he knew that you'd book him a wonderful trip to all the islands, Stony Island, Blue Island, and Rock Island.
No, but I got to tell you.
Rock Island is extra. Rock Island is extra. You just don't get to.
Well, you get to see the Arsenal. John will get you to see the Arsenal out there.
But I tell you, this book and alone, the chapters, I'm not done with it. The pictures alone, what we talked about tonight, you brought back so much stuff about Chicago that's been forgotten. You kind of like revived it. I'm just telling you right now, anybody who get this book, it's not only about Dick Allen, it's about Chicago. It's about the history, like George said, of broadcasting. George, fantastic. It blows away the 69 Chicago Cub book. I don't know how to tell you that, but Dick Allen, the 1972 White Sox, transforming Chicago. George Castle, fantastic work. Thank you for coming on Angles and Attitude with me and Mark.
Thank you for having me on, and I will conveniently lose the invoice that you're sending out the mail to me for that praise.
Yeah.
Hey, no problem. We're going to have you back. We're going to get you the hat trick. You're going to be the first three-timer.
Yes.
As the baseball season progresses, we're just going to get on and talk to State of Baseball. Deal?
And I do want to mention, as we're doing this, Pat Foley is about to do his final broadcast of the Hawks. And I mentioned before we went, the cameras went live. The crazy thing about this is that Pat had 40 years, basically 40 years of the Hawks. And the guy he and I grew up with, and all of us grew up with, the absolute mainstay of hockey broadcasting in Chicago, Lloyd Pettit, only did the Hawks for 15 years. Can you believe that contrast in the number of times that they were, a number of years that they were on the air? It's absolutely astounding that the Lloyd Pettit had that short of a hockey career compared to all the greats like Dan Kelly and of course Pat Foley and everybody, Doc Emmerich.
We're getting close. We got on schedule in a couple of weeks. Doc Emmerich's going to find his way to Angles and Attitude, so we'll be sure to ask him about that as well.
Faust. You got to get us Nancy Faust.
If you want Nancy Faust, I will contact her. She is back in Chicago. She splits her time between Chicago and Arizona. She is a donkey mom. She keeps two pet donkeys. Can I quickly tell you that story? She started keeping donkeys when Bill Veeck had a donkey as one of the prizes for his ballpark promotions, and nobody claimed this donkey. So Nancy took the donkey home. So she has video on Twitter of her playing Take Me Out to the Ball Game with her donkey Mandy nuzzling the keys of the keyboard.
That might be an all-time first. That might get us unbelievable ratings, or might shut down Angles and Attitude if we get Nancy Faust and a donkey on. So
I will call her on your behalf. Gentlemen, I will call her on your behalf.
You got it. Thanks, George.
Fantastic work
as always. Stay well.
Take care. Thank you for all the promotion, all the kind words. I wish we had 3 hours to really delve into 1972.
We'll get you back. Promise.
Thank you.
Take care, George.
Take care.
Bye.